Good morning. Welcome to Pipes and Poetry. Welcome back to my garage. Today we're going to talk about William Butler Yeats, and specifically his poem Sailing to Byzantium. Some people look at this poem as one of the best in English language. Not sure how I feel about that. I like the poem. Again, I'm not into rating this poem above that one. There are ones I like better than others. This is not my favorite poem, even by him. It's one of them, though. It's definitely up there. I'm not going to get into a lot of the Yeats biography this time because I don't think it's really necessary for the poem. I do think it's important to note that he was born in 1865 and died in 1939. So he lived to quite a ripe old age. He was very influential in Ireland and still is. He's probably one of the, in the top 5 Irish writers. I would think maybe Swift, Wilde, Joyce, Yeats would probably be a good top 4. Many other good Irish writers, great Irish writers, but there's no doubt about Yeats's influence on as an Irish writer, as a writer of English literature, and worldwide influence. He was awarded the Nobel Prize, so his work is widely known and respected and looked to. Real just quickly, he was born a Protestant in Ireland, and the Irish nationalism sort of took over, where Catholicism, I think, became sort of a dominant force. He did join in that Irish nationalist movement. He eventually became a senator for the Free State of Ireland. And so he was political as well. But that's about as to branch off. He wasn't a religious man per se. He sort of deviated away from his both Protestantism or Catholicism. Not that he was ever Catholic, but he became sort of began to practice what a lot of people call mysticism. He said he believed in magic at one point. He could have been, that could have been tongue in cheek, but he definitely had some beliefs, and he wrote these in a book called A Vision. I've never read this book. I've read about the book, reading about Yeats, and I won't get into his sort of worldview of how that works. He does mention in here one of the key terms, which is a gyre, and I believe he regularly pronounced it gyre, so I will pronounce it that way in the poem. I don't know which is right. When I see it, I tend to want to say gyre, but we'll probably talk more about that when we do Second Coming. I do plan on doing at least 2 more Yeats poems, Second Coming and Easter 1916. But for now, we will start with Sailing to Byzantium, and we will leave his biography at that. Feel free to read up on it if you want. He's a very interesting man. A lot of interesting things happen. Well, another thing to note, this is a late poem. I believe 1928 is the date that's pinned on it in the book that I have. I don't know if that's the writing date or the publication date. It was published in his book, The Tower. I think which came because he bought a tower. Anyway, let's get into the poem. So let me test this again, because this tends to, I think if the iPad goes to sleep, this stops working. So let me make sure it's working, because I think it didn't work on the last one. But yep, it appears to be working. Okay, so I'm not going to completely read through the poem because it's kind of long, but I'll read through each section and then we will talk about it. If this doesn't work and you would prefer me to read through the poem, let me know. But on longer poems, I'll probably read through sections. But real quickly, this is in a certain standard, it has a form, sort of like the Shakespearean sonnets, a pretty strict form that it follows. And each of these 4 sections are sort of the same in that nature. It is in iambic pentameter for the most part. I did try to read through a lot of the sentences and see if it was iambic pentameter to me. Again, remember, I'm not a foot and meter guy, so I don't really focus on that too much, but I did try to read, and there were a couple that sort of stood out as not being there, but in iambic pentameter, or at least I couldn't force it in there some way. But supposedly it is, but the rhyme scheme is this: A, B, A, B, A, B, C, C. So we get young, song, long, trees, seas, and dies rhyme. I'm going to erase this because I think I'm going to need the room for stuff later. So anyway, that's the rhyme scheme. They all stick to it. They all stick to iambic pentameter for the most part. So let's get into the first section here. He did number these. These are his numbering, the Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, and 4, for what that's worth. So the first, I guess, stanza here. That is no country for old men. The young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations at their song. The salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas, fish, flesh, or fowl commend all summer long whatever is begotten, born, and dies. Caught in that sensual music, all neglect monuments of unaiding intellect. Okay, so real quickly, this is the speaker here, as we will see, is sailing away from somewhere. Now, again, I've talked about speakers and authors and all of that stuff, but we can imagine if this were Yeats, he would be sailing away from Ireland, his home country. But anyway, the speaker is sailing away from a country, his country, what is or was his country. And he says that, meaning the country he's looking back on, is no country for old men. Now, you'll probably notice that No Country for Old Men is where Cormac McCarthy took the title of his book, and where the Coen brothers got the title of the movie when they made a movie out of the book. We may get into some theories about why that was named. I think I've read something about it before. I don't think, and we'll see. But I probably won't get into it too much. So he says that his country is no country for old men, and as we will see, he is an old man, and Yeats is an old man writing this. This is 1928, and remember, he was born in 1865. So he's a fairly old man at this time. So the speaker goes on to, and this gets complicated, this part of the poem. A lot of places get complicated in this poem. This is why you can sit there, and this is one you can read, get your pipe out and pick it up, once a month or once every so often, and go back to it and see what you can find of it. But the thing that is sort of complicated is the language. He starts making a list here, as you can see from all the commas. So the first part of the list is the young in one another's arms. So he's looking back at this country, and this is what he sees. This country that is no country for old men. The young in one another's arms, birds in the trees. And then we get this strange punctuation, a hyphen. And he says, those dying generations. Now, I assume he's talking about the young in one another's arms, the birds and the trees. And as we will see, this makes sense because he's talking about all living things that die. And as we get later on in the poem, we'll see he is not too fond of living things, or not at least in his current state, the speaker that is. So he starts making the list: the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations at their song. And then he starts listing some sort of like places instead of things, or places or things, but instead of like objects. The salmon falls, so the water falls where the salmon, I guess, are swimming upstream. The mackerel crowded seas. Fish, flesh, or fowl commend all summer long. Whatever is begotten, born, and dies. So fish, flesh, or fowl is pretty much every animal on earth, right? So maybe bacteria or something like that. But they commend or praise all the summer long whatever is begotten, born, and dies. Now, this summer, we can kind of think that this season that he's in is summer. And remember, we talked about that. Summer being the age of growth, spring being the rebirth, summer growth, fall either, more aging or reaping, harvesting. The summer would be, for the young lovers, the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees. So we get the idea that he's sailing away from this country that is no country for old men, and it's the summertime, and all of these things are symbols or emblematic of dying generations, meaning that even though they're young now, they will die. So the young are a dying generation. The birds in the trees are dying generations. They will die. And they are caught in that sensual music, being caught in that sensual music, all, and I think here he means all of these things: the young, the birds, sort of like these places, the seas, the falls, all neglect monuments of unaging intellect. Now, monuments here, we will put in another color. Not really any method to it, just because we can, but we're going to highlight some monuments later on. So all of these dying things, these things capable of dying, neglect the monuments of unaging intellect. So there is a sort of intelligence to things that don't pass away. There's an idea here of change versus permanence, or we could call it stasis. Monuments, if we consider being of stone, should last quite a long time, much longer than a young lover will, or a bird, or salmon, or mackerel, or anything that is fish, flesh, or fowl. Okay, so that's where our speaker is now, because he is in the summer, pointing to a country, and we'll see he's at sea already. He's pointing to his country, saying that is no country for old men. And he goes on to talk about, as he says, there's no country for old men. I'll do blue here. He says, an aged man is but a paltry thing. I'll read through this whole thing real quick. And I say aged because I think it's necessary for the iambic pentameter. Pronounce it how you will. An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. Nor is there singing school, but studying monuments of its own magnificence. And therefore I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. So we have another monuments. And we may do the same thing. Let me see if I can I get another color? I don't know. Not really. Okay. Well, let's go red, maybe. We'll look at some song, singing school, and louder sing. Okay. So an aged man is but a paltry thing, meaning of little significance, I think, or just a mere unnoticeable or inconsequential, maybe. And he's a tattered coat upon a stick. Again, this metaphor of his clothes, his skin is and muscles are like a tattered cloak. He's worn. Unless the soul claps its hands and sings louder for every tatter in its moral dress. So this gets complicated again. The language does, because these things can refer to different things. But we'll say that the soul, and again, if we get to permanence, if there is anything about the human that is permanent, it would be the soul. Now, whether you believe in a soul or spirit or something or not, that's up to you. But Yeats mentions, apparently the speaker believes the soul exists, because an aged man is but a paltry thing unless the soul claps his hands and sings. But this is where it gets a little confusing for me. He says, nor is there singing school, so a way to teach it to sing. There's nothing to teach it to sing other than studying these monuments of its own magnificence. Now, I have to assume that it points back to the soul. I couldn't read it. I tried to read it in other ways. It also, because here's its again. For every tatter in its mortal dress, nor is there singing school, but studying monuments of its own magnificence. So the soul, the way it can learn, because there's no school for singing, and you can think of singing as poetry here. So he could be talking about the ability to write poetry. Could be sort of a metafictional type of thing, where this poem is talking about writing in itself, or composing poetry in itself. So there's no singing school. All it can do is study monuments of its own magnificence. And therefore, because that's all it can do, therefore, there's a reason. It implies that this is the reason that there's nothing for it to do but study these monuments. Therefore, he has sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. Now, Byzantium, current day, sorry about that, Istanbul, and what was Constantinople, was a very rich city, a port city, which is rumored to have been pretty much plastered or whatever, enameled. We'll see the word enameled later on, in gold. Gold was apparently on the rooftops. And being such a rich city, it led itself to many different invasions and possessions by It was named Constantinople because Emperor Constantine, who converted to Christianity, and named it. It was a capital city of Rome. And then, the Ottoman Turks, I think, invaded it, and has gone back and forth throughout history. But apparently, there's a lot of monuments and art, and feel free to look up the history of Istanbul, Constantinople, Byzantium. But because of these monuments and art, let me get back here. Art, monuments, statues, sculptures. Permanence. The speaker begins to think of this as some sort of permanence. Stasis. Therefore, he has sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. Okay, let's go to section 3. O sages standing in God's holy fire, as in the gold mosaic of a wall, come from the holy fire, Pern and Agyre, and be the singing masters of my soul. Consume my heart away, sick with desire, and fastened to a dying animal, it knows not what it is, and gather me into the artifice of eternity. So, he sings out or prays to the sages, and we can think of this as being different from the saints, sort of, because they are secular. But they are standing in God's holy fire as in the gold mosaic of a wall. Sort of like if he were to go there, he would encounter these sages that are in God's holy fire, and that he may see in a gold mosaic. Apparently mosaics are pretty common in Byzantium. Never been there myself. I've been to Turkey, but never to Istanbul. As in the gold mosaic of a wall. Again, this is art or permanence. And he says, come from the holy fire. And this word pern, I looked it up, and it means something like an action of unwinding or winding as thread on a bobbin. So I guess a sewing term, sort of. It may have been particular to Yeats, and maybe in older time, this may be in a word that has lost meaning or lost usage in our time, and maybe in his time, or maybe in something he can remember back. He can hear it in his language, and meaning English, but an older form of English that maybe he heard growing up or something. But here is that gyre or gyre that's integral to his philosophy of life, I guess you could call it, or his system that he's developed, and that involves sort of a mysticism, and we'll see in Second Coming sort of an all can be one, or all minds can interact in one mind. He uses some terms there, and we'll talk about that more. But here, not sure why he says it, unless it's pertaining to his system. But he's saying to come from the holy fire and be the singing masters of his soul. So again, we get this singing. And we get an idea of teaching, as in the school, because he wants them to be his masters, the singing masters of his soul. So he wants them to show his soul, or at least provide some guidance or instruction in how to sing, because an aged man is but a paltry thing unless the soul claps its hands and sings. So apparently he's going here because of this and wants these sages, wise men, that have experienced God's holy fire to teach his soul to sing. Consume my heart away. So his heart is the heart being a physical thing. Take it away. Consume it away. Eat it. Consume. Sick with desire and fastened to a dying animal. So his soul is fastened to his body, which is a dying animal, such as we are all. Our physical body, anyway. It knows not what it is. And again, this is, you could look at it as the animal does not know what it is, but I think it's pretty clearly pointing to it knows not what it is the soul. And maybe that's why he's wanting instruction on how to sing, how to make his soul sing. Or write poetry. Again, this could be all a metaphor for him desiring a muse to write poetry and achieve this monument. Milton goes into, I think in one of his poems, about writing, and when the poet creates or the artist creates, that's the permanence, and sort of turns into a statue. That's the goal of the artist, is for themselves to become a statue or become stone, because their art will live on, and therefore they are more than just their body anymore. They are, when you look at the Yeats statue, he has a statue there because his poetry has lived on. The statue, were it not for his poetry, the statue's not there. So same with Milton, same with Shakespeare, anybody that there's a statue of, any artist, or anybody for that matter, whatever they did, if it didn't live on, there would be no statue there. So the goal would be for an artist or someone with ambition to turn to stone or become a statue. Anyway, it knows not what it is, meaning his soul, because he wants these masters to teach him. Basically, these monuments and this art of Byzantium to teach his soul how to sing. And gather me into the artifice of eternity. Artifice for emphasis. Of eternity. Because art, as I said, will last. And we get some idea of this stasis again. Vice, something that will decay. Okay. Final stanza, number 4. Once out of nature, I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing, but such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make of hammered gold and gold enameling to keep a drowsy emperor awake, or set upon a golden bough to sing to lords and ladies of Byzantium of what is past or passing or to come. So, once out of nature, his body, he's never going to take a bodily form from a natural thing. So if there's an idea of reincarnation or something, once his soul escapes the body, he's not going to re-enter, and be reborn a deer or a bird or anything like that. He wants to become something that goldsmiths make, and specifically Grecian. Now, he sailed to Byzantium, and Byzantium's in Turkey. But he wants to be such as a Grecian goldsmith would make. Now, there's definitely this could definitely be looked at as sort of a reaction. Because if you go back to, and a very confusing poet, or not that he's confusing himself, but to a young person first experiencing poetry, something that's very confusing, and not that this has anything to do with the poem, but there's a poet named Keats, Keats, and you have to learn that there's also a poet named Yeats, Yeats. They're not Keats and Yeats, as much as I would have, 14-year-old or 13-year-old me or however old I was would like them to have been. There's Keats and Yeats. However, Keats was a romantic. Yeats, when he started, was pretty much of the romantic, mindset. A lot of his early poems, I think, I've read a lot of Yeats poems, but I'm not on the level of a scholar or anything. But anyway, there is a poem, and this is odd because it comes at the very beginning, right here, and then right here. This seems to be a reaction. Keats wrote a poem called Ode to a Nightingale. And he says that the nightingale is an eternal or undying or some sort of creature like that, or immortal, I think maybe what he says. But he specifically says, and this could be a reaction to Keats, and we'll see with this last stanza. So these birds, and he immediately says those dying generations. So take that, Keats. Your immortal nightingale is a dying generation. And the reason I think he's speaking to Keats there, or could be, excuse me, Keats also has a poem called, and we will do this one. This is one of my favorite poems of all time. Ode on a Grecian urn. And it is very much about the permanence of this, the scene that's depicted on this urn. He's looking at, the speaker is looking at this urn. And it is very much what a Grecian goldsmith would make, would be this Grecian urn. So feel free to get into that and observe that, and either read Ode on a Grecian Urn on your own. It's very well worth it. Again, like I said, it's one of my favorites. We will do it here. You can wait for that if you want. It probably won't be too far away. Maybe I should have done it first. But back to this poem. So he says, we talked about that. Once out of nature, he doesn't want to be a natural thing. He wants to be something artificial. He wants to be art himself. Something that a Grecian goldsmith would make. Of hammered gold and gold enameling to keep a drowsy emperor awake. Now, apparently there was legend that there was a tree and maybe some mechanical birds that would sing in Byzantium. That's what he wants to be. He wants to be a mechanical bird. Set upon a bough to sing, sing to lords and ladies of Byzantium of what is, and this gets to monuments, past, passing, or to come. That means of all time. All time. Right? Permanent, the monument. So that's what I get. You can read this poem, get into it, and look at the sentences. See what's referring to what, especially what pronoun is referring to what other pronoun. You can flip some things around, play with it. I think that's what it's meant for. There are other themes, but play with those. It's definitely one to put on your read it now, and then in a moment of relaxation or whatever, a month or 2 months from now, go back to it. See how it changes as you change. So I think that does it for today. I look forward to seeing you again. If you liked the video, please go click the like button and actually physically like the video. Subscribe if you want. And this has been Pipes and Poetry, and thank you for watching. Please leave a comment also. That would be great. I don't have any comments yet. I'd love to have some comments and see what someone else thinks besides just talking to myself. Thank you.